G'day Year 12 and thank you for watching the YouTube clips. Today we're taking a look at financial management and in particular the financial management strategies. It's a vital part of the financial process and without effective strategies businesses can't look at what's being done poorly and improve upon things. We're taking a look at probably the most difficult aspect of financial management in terms of the strategies, and that is global financial management strategies. Now, there are about sort of 5 or 6 different financial management strategies we're going to address today. First of them is exchange rates. That itself's not necessarily a strategy, but what you do and how you hedge against these exchange rates are, and we'll talk about that in a bit. You're also going to be looking at interest rates and how to source cheaper global interest rates as a method of financial management and strategies. We're going to look at this concept of methods of international payment. And there's 4 types. And we're going to be having a look at, if you're an importer and an exporter, which one would you choose and why, and how therefore it can be a strategy. We're going to take a look at 2 other concepts under the strategies of global financial management. That is hedging, and one major example, which is derivatives. It's a way in which you can hedge, but also another type of hedging, which is natural subsidiaries. All right, so firstly, the first strategy the syllabus gives us in global financial management are exchange rates. What is an exchange rate? This refers to changes or fluctuations in a country's exchange rate and the impact it would have on the business. In terms of exchange rates, 2 things can kind of happen. One, our dollar, AUD, can either go up or down against a different country's currency, like the US dollar, USD, or even New Zealand dollar, NZD. If ours goes up comparing to, say, the New Zealand dollar, it's called an appreciation. If ours goes down, sad face, it's called a depreciation. They're good and bad, depending on whether you're an importing business or an exporting business. But what's not good in general is that it has this major volatility or fluctuations. Business wants certainty. And if we can try and lock in some certainty, then that's a good strategy. So exchange rates themselves aren't necessarily so good, but later we're going to mention hedging and the use of derivatives or natural hedging called subsidiaries. They are the strategies to deal with this. Now, the next strategy we've got is interest rates. And interest rates are set via an organisation in a country or a region these days called the central bank. Australia has the Reserve Bank of Australia. I'll get that right eventually, Reserve Bank of Australia. And the European Union has, rather than each country having their own central banks, it has one region central bank. They primarily set the level of interest, although these days banks do what banks do and kind of differ from what the overnight cash rate is. Now, that's all good. We know what interest rates are. But how is it a strategy for a business? Well, most businesses are geared or leveraged in some way. They've taken out loans, and therefore, if they can find the cheapest possible interest rate, they're going to make cost savings. It's going to meet one of those 5 financial objectives, which is efficiency. Lower cost with efficiency will also meet another key financial objectives, which would be, what do you think? Profitability. That's right. So it really is a key strategy that can be used. Domestically, interest rates is kind of a strategy on its own. I'm a business. I'm BHP. I just look all around Australia at St George Bank, Commonwealth Bank, Suncorp, whoever's, and I source the cheapest interest rate. But in terms of this global financial management, it becomes more of a strategy because it's only one country, Australia. If you can look at the other 180 odd countries around the world and find which has the cheapest interest rate, then and choose that particular interest rate, then obviously that's going to be a major cost saving for you. That's how it's a strategy. The downside a little bit is, though, that the benefit you get from finding a cheaper interest rate, if it's in a country like, say, Zimbabwe, where the dollar is often dramatically depreciating against ours, that can be a problem trying to pay these things back. So it's something you need to take into account when sourcing global interest rates, the volatility of exchange rates. Now, this is a topic that is pretty difficult, or a set of strategies that students often find hard. It's called methods of international payment. Now, there's 4 different types of methods of international payment. And we're talking about how to make payments between an importer in Australia, for argument's sake, and an exporter overseas, or vice versa, buying or selling something from in Australia, but from somebody else overseas. Now, each of these 4 have different benefits for the importer, or other ones have different benefits for the exporter. Now, in terms of being an exporting business, again, being a seller and exporting business, this is the order in terms of low risk to high risk. So I'm an exporting business. I'm BHP and I'm exporting my product, selling it overseas. This is what I'd like to have. Payment in advance. Then, next letter of credit. Following that, if I'm forced, a bill of exchange. And the last method I want as an exporter is the clean payment method. That's not good for me. We'll get in and talk about what those are in just a sec. On the flip side, if you're an importer like JB Hi-Fi, you're buying products from overseas, then you want the opposite order. And this is how it's all a strategy, because certain things are safer for you or more risky, and hence it's a strategy. So the order of risk from low to high for an importing Aussie business is to have clean payment first. Then if you can't get that, which is often the case, a bill of exchange. A letter of credit would be next that you'd want. And the last thing you want as an importing, buying business is to have payment in advance. That's not good for you. Now let's have a quick look at these 4 different methods of payments. The first one is payment in advance. And this refers to the method of payment that happens when an exporter or seller requires the importer or buyer to make the payment for the good in full before they ship them off to the importer. And that's ship, by the way, not the other word you're thinking. This is the lowest risk for the exporter, the seller, but the highest risk for the importer, the buyer. Now, can I urge you with all of these, they're very difficult concepts to get. I've mentioned it in class before. Have a look at the different textbooks that we have, and you choose for each of these 4 which definition you can best remember, because it'll be a little bit different for each student. The next method of payment you can use is called a letter of credit. Now, it's the second favoured method for the seller or an exporter. And what is it? It's a promise from the importer, the buyer's bank, that the payment will be made to the exporter once proof of shipping has been shown. If the importer becomes insolvent, has no coin or cashola, then the exporter still receives payment by the importer's bank as they hold the funds. So there's some level of flexibility there. It's not best for either. It's kind of a bit of a midway point, as in a bill of exchange. Now, the bill of exchange is the second last of these methods of payment. It's favoured by the importer buyer compared to the seller. A bill of exchange is a document drawn up by the exporter demanding payment from the importer at a certain specified date and time. The exchange usually contains an instruction for a third party, such as a bank, to pay a predetermined amount they come up with, sum of money, at a future date on demand to the seller of the products. If the importer in this instance becomes insolvent, then the exporter is unlikely to receive payment by the importer's bank. This is because no actual funds have been deposited yet into the exporter's bank. It's more a promise of funds that will be paid. Now, the last strategy here, or method of payment, is called clean payment. It's the opposite of payment in advance. It's when the exporter sends the goods off to the importer before any payment's made. They require payment after the importer receives the goods. Now, this is the lowest risk for the buyer, the importer, but it's very risky for the seller, the exporter. So if you are an importer, you want this strategy, and explain why it's a good strategy in an essay. If you're an exporter, no dice. You're not interested in this particular strategy. If it's forced on you, then it's going to have negative consequences for you. Okay, now moving on to the last two global financial management strategies. We have hedging. That's the major heading. And under that, you can choose to have derivatives. It's a type of hedging. Or you can have subsidiaries. This concept's also called natural hedging. I really think in the syllabus you should have hedging, derivatives, and another example being called subsidiaries, but they don't. It's talked about subsidiaries under hedging. But it's easy for kids to get confused by. But what's hedging? Hedging is putting in place measures to protect or mitigate against volatile exchange rate fluctuations. Dollars because we have, or currencies, not always dollars, because we have a floating exchange rate system. It's always up and down, up and down. Business, again, wants certainty. They want to be able to know, okay, I am a business, a manufacturing business in China. I want to be able to purchase BHP's metals that they've dug up from the ground in Australia. I want it locked in, this exchange rate, so that I have some level of certainty. Because if it changes too much, it's risky. If I've only got 4 or 5% profit margin, if the currency changed by 10%, I could be 14% now net profit, or I could be minus 6%. So it can actually end businesses if there is too much fluctuation. As I mentioned before, there's two types of strategies under hedging. That's the heading. That is to have a derivative or use derivatives, or to use natural subsidiaries. Very quickly, strategy one, which is called subsidiaries or natural hedging, same thing, different name. Example I often give is Woolworths in Australia. They're the parent company. They own Countdown, which is the baby company. Don't ever say baby company in a test. But they are owned by the parent company, and that's okay to say. That baby company is called a subsidiary. Baby subsidiary. If you have kids, call them subsidiary. Jokes. Now, Woolworths, Australian owned, Countdown, Woolworths owning in New Zealand, whatever exchange rate they agree between each other is set. They don't need to worry about getting a derivative and locking in currencies at future dates, because it is the same. They are different businesses, but Woolworths owns Countdown and they can agree to set a particular exchange rate. Now, the last strategy today, which comes under one other example here of hedging, is called derivatives. Now, in terms of derivatives, you basically go to a third party, often a bank, and you want to be able to lock in an exchange rate at a future date. Whatever it may well be, and it could be the Australian dollar versus New Zealand dollar, the Australian dollar versus euro, whatever. You want to lock in a fixed figure exchange rate at a future date in time. That's what derivatives are, being able to see this third party, this bank, this intermediary, and getting it locked in. Now, there's three examples that in business studies we want you to use in exams in terms of derivatives. They are forward exchange contracts, currency option contracts, and swap contracts. Now, I'm going to go through those today. Ask your teacher, ask me if you want further information on that, but there are three examples you need to provide for in an exam. All right, thanks guys. Appreciate you listening. Any questions, always can ask me on Slack. See ya.